Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Safari Pedals Show. I'm your host, Abby. If this is your first time here, welcome to the Crazy Wild Safari Pedals Podcast Zoo Thing bandwagon. It's great to have you. I am super pumped and super excited for today's episode and for today's guest. Camilo Velandia is going to be on the show. He is a Latin Grammy Award-winning guitarist and producer. We're going to be diving into a plethora of topics. Do you see what I did? I used the word plethora. I think that was pretty darn impressive. But yes, we will be diving into a plethora of topics from his audio and music journey, what inspired him to get into music, become a guitarist, and all of that good jazz, to how he likes to shape his tone, guitars, pedals, amps, all of that fun jazz, and his approach to production, recording, career, and all of the fun, amazing things in between. So guys, please give a very warm Safari welcome to Camilo Velandia. Woo! Welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thank you. So happy to be here.
I'm super pumped that you're here and on the show. Thank you so much for your time. Before we dive in, let's start with who you are, what you do, and we'll take it from there.
All right, cool. So I'm originally a musician, guitar player. I started out as just like a gigging guitar player, then I became like a touring guitar player. I toured with some big Latin. I'm in Miami, Florida. Well, I'm a little bit outside of Miami now, but I still say Miami. There's like a big Latin market here, you know. So I toured with a lot of the big Latin artists, and then I got more into the studio stuff. Now I do like 80% or 90% studio and 10% like touring and stuff. So, but yeah, that's mostly what I do.
That's awesome. I'd love to go back and like hear a little about like what got you into music in the first place. Like, what was your journey through?
So my dad was a musician. He was a keyboard player, and then since I was really little, he like was teaching me keyboard, you know. But you know, like typical old Hispanic parent, he was like really rough and strict. So I wasn't really into it at all, you know. But it was cool because it developed my ear since I was like really little. And then when I was like 10 or 11, I started high school and then I picked up violin. I was kind of like not so into it, but I did it through high school. And then in my violin class, my friend had an electric guitar, and I went to his house and I saw him play his electric guitar, and I was like, man, that's what I want to do. That sounds cool, you know. And so then I got an electric guitar, and then that's it. Then it was like the rest of my life was doomed from that point. You know?
That's when the bad things started to happen from there on out.
Exactly. That's like it's like in the movie The Exorcist, you know, when she starts to play with the Ouija board.
Literally.
I don't know if I can say that on your podcast, but
for sure.
From there on, you start to see the signs. It all just
Pandora's box opened, and then like that's when everything went downhill. And that's the end of the episode, guys. Thank you for tuning in. It was a great time. We'll leave it at that.
Sorry for any possessions that may be happening from this point on from watching this.
In the downhill spiral that you went from, okay, I want this electric guitar, to, oh my God, this is my job.
But I was like super into Iron Maiden like all of high school, you know. So I would just sit there and like I would just play Iron Maiden literally like for hours and hours and hours. I would learn all their songs. And it wasn't like I'm gonna sit here and practice guitar. Like I never thought that ever. But I was just sitting there and I was just like, I was so addicted to it. I was just like, I just gotta learn everything I can, you know? And anything that I liked, you know, any bands or whatever. So I would sit there and just play for like 10 hours a day, you know? And then my mom saw that I was like really into it. So then she got me like a private guitar teacher. And then he turned me on to like more of like the jazz. Oh, I mean, he turned me on. He saw I was like into the rock stuff. So he turned me on to what he thought were better guitar players. And then, so I got into those, like Ingrid Malmsteen and Steve Vai, like those guys, like the guitar heroes, you know? And then he got me more into jazz. And then that was the first time that when I hadn't had any like proper ear musical training or whatever, but I could kind of like learn things by ear sort of thing, you know? And then the first time that I heard the jazz stuff, that was the first time that I was like, oh man, I can't, like, I don't recognize these chords, you know? So then I was kind of like intrigued by that. And then I guess by that point I was going to college. And so I signed up for the jazz program. And then there was a guy in my I think it was like the jazz band ensemble, and he was like a working saxophone player. Like he would play with tracks, and so he's like, "Hey, you should come play with me." And then so I just started doing gigs with him, and then he would just pay me. He would pay me in tips, like he would give me the tips, you know. And then eventually he would start asking for budget for 2 people, and then that's it. That's how I kind of started gigging, you know.
That's awesome. And from there, like, you just kind of, as time went on, got clients, word of mouth type thing?
Yeah, so yeah, it's always been word of mouth because I've never auditioned for anything. I've so from there I just kind of started to meet people. I guess that's a good thing maybe about going to music school, that everybody's getting into something, and so hey, I remember, yeah, this guy I go to school with, you know, call him or whatever. So somehow I'm trying to remember how I started working with this like top 40 band. Somebody recommended me or something, but whatever. I started working with a top 40 band that, you know, it was like really busy. It was like 4 days a week gigs, you know. So then I had to learn all the top 40 stuff from like all the American kind of from back, you know, like Motown stuff all the way to the modern stuff, you know. And then I worked with that band for a while, and then I was just filling in with different top 40 bands and stuff. That was like the gym, I think. I think of that as like the gym because you're like learning all the stuff, you know. And then I remember this bass player that I played with recommended me for this like girl, this like singer-songwriter. She was like having a CD release party, and her guitar player bailed on her. And so it was like super last minute, you know? And then he recommended me, and the girl called me. She was like in distress. "Oh my gosh, my guitar player bailed on me. Can you do this gig on Thursday? Like the only catch is you have to learn all my songs for my album." And it was like 7 songs. It wasn't that many. And then she sent me the songs, and I thought they were really cool. So I learned them, and it was like I kind of memorized them, you know, because I kind of liked the songs. And then it turns out that her boyfriend at the time was the music director for this guy named John Cicada, who's like a big artist from the 90s. And so when I showed up to rehearsal and I like knew everything and I had most of them memorized and all that stuff, he kind of saw that. And then at the time, they had fired the guitar player and the drummer for that band for John. So he asked me like right there in that rehearsal, I think he was like, "Hey, do you want to tour with John Cicada?" And I was like, "I don't know. Am I good enough?" And he's like, "Yeah, you're all right." And then that's it. And then so I got on that, and that was like my first, I guess, major artist that I was like touring with, you know?
That's awesome, dude. I love that. You're all right. Good enough. Sounds like a plan. Hop on.
Exactly.
No pressure.
I hope you are. I hope you're good enough. I don't know. You know?
Hey, but if you said before that things were already going downhill, like you were just following the direction, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. This is like the right path or the wrong path. Oh, let's keep going down the wrong path.
Yeah. No, I love that. I'd love to dive in a little bit, since you have so much experience under your belt, a little bit into how you like to shape your tone, maybe some favorite guitars, favorite pedals, amps, preamps, all of that jazz.
So yeah, I mean, at the very beginning, I'd never really thought about any of that. So I think a big part of, like, I guess improving your tone is just trying different things too, you know? Because I think if you stick to the same gear, you think it sounds good, but it isn't until you try something else. And sometimes you try something else, and you think, "Oh, this doesn't sound good," but it's just that you're used to something else, sort of thing. So I think when I started to just openly get more experimental about trying new things, I think that's when I started to notice, "Oh, wait, this sounds like this, and this sounds like this," you know? So I was always like for example, I was always like a Strat guy with like a Fender amp, you know? And then I bought a Les Paul, and I was like, "Oh yeah, this is cool, but I don't really get it," you know? And then I think you kind of realize where things fit, you know? So it's with guitars and with pedals and with microphones and with preamps, you know? You kind of see where things shine. You know, it's like the whole typical thing of when people say somebody sounds really good on a Telefunken 251, but then somebody doesn't, you know? I've had those experiences where, like, I have a bunch of, you know, I have a couple, like, 251 style mics, and like they work perfectly for a ton of people, and then one person comes in and it's like super harsh on that person, you know. Then I have to try another mic. I think being surrounded by different options is a good part of it. I also like to think that I don't trust myself, you know. So I always have a reference of sounds. Like if I'm working on a song, like if I'm producing something, I'll make a playlist of songs that I'm like, okay, this is what I imagine, like on Spotify or on Tidal, or I mostly use Tidal. I'll use it like a big reference kind of pool of things that I like to reference back to. So I'm like, okay, I'm still within these parameters, you know?
That's super. I never thought to do that. Like in terms of referencing, like usually when it comes to referencing, I think of like referencing a mix or
A
like the
mix, yeah.
overall sonic. But like it's interesting that you say like, oh, referencing like a guitar tone, and that can go for anything. So I'm gonna definitely take that. That's dope.
Yeah, I have a, I thought I was the only person that did that. I mean, no, let me take a look. I didn't think that I was the only person that did that, but I was the only person that I knew that did that. Like on Spotify, I had like a playlist that was all like acoustic, vintage, dark guitars, and it was like a playlist of all this like old like vintage recordings of like darker sounding folky acoustic, and then it's like bright pop acoustic guitar. You know, it's like all these references that I would keep for myself, so I could listen back and be like, oh yeah, what? Let me look at this playlist and remember what that sounded like. You know, and then I remember I met a producer and he had the same thing. It was like, pop, bright, poppy mixes. Dark, whatever. But it makes sense because think about it. I mean, you only have one brain, and then we're constantly like changing. Like what you like 6 months ago, now maybe you're still into it, or maybe you're like, oh man, what the hell was I thinking? That sounds like shit. So I don't trust myself. I don't like. I'd rather question myself and then check myself against something else and be like, oh, okay, I was in the right path.
This show is very much centered around the concept of starting out, being new, being up and coming. Do you have any pieces of advice for either up and coming engineers, producers, musicians, anyone that wants to get into the music world?
I think ask questions. Like I remember I always did. Like even when I started like gigging with bands, and very often I would find myself playing with people that were better than me, and I would literally bug them. Hey, what'd you think? Hey, what should I work on? And I remember a lot of people being like, man, nobody asks that. And then when I started working in studios, I would ask the engineer, hey, what are you doing? What is that? What does that do? And like people are like really happy to talk about that stuff, but they're not if you don't ask them. So I don't know. I feel like I learned a lot, like to get started, just being in studios and asking like, hey, what are you doing? Like, what does that do? And like nobody was ever like, shut the fuck up, we gotta keep moving. Like that never happened once. They were all like, oh yeah, well this thing is, whatever. This is the mute button and you have it on. I would say, like, don't just keep it in your mind. Just ask questions. Because people like to talk about things, especially the people that mixing engineers or everybody likes to talk about what plugins they use,
I love how you mentioned, I want to note that as like a point in the show that you mentioned curiosity in the sense that it's like a driving force to like snowball everything else. And I think that's a super valuable gem. So I just wanted to highlight that. About like really letting kind of you can say like intuition, whatever it is, like push you to just act.
Yeah, and don't limit it. I mean, I wish I would have, because like now, like for example, right now I make a living out of playing guitar, producing songs, recording vocals, tuning vocals, putting people's tracks on time in time and on a grid. It's like all these things that I would have never like aspired to learn any of this. You know what I mean? Because most of that stuff I didn't even know it existed when I started. But I'm just saying, like, there are so many avenues that you can take if you kind of just let your curiosity guide you, and then I don't know. There's so many ways to make a living nowadays. Like people say, oh, it's a terrible time to be a musician. There's no money in music. Like there is so much money in music. It's just you can't think of how the old ways. You kind of just have to see what's happening now.
To sum up everything that we spoke about, I love to always ask our guests to either drop, it can be a piece of advice or it can be anything that you want to say. Feel free to totally freestyle to the amazing Studio Animal viewers watching. So do you have anything additional to drop to the world?
Don't limit yourself. Don't cut yourself short. Like, don't think, oh, I'm only a bass player, or I'm only going to be a, even if it's working out for you. Because I always think of it like, what am I going to be doing in 10 years? Like, right now I sleep like 4 to 6 hours. I'm working 18 hours a day. But I'm also thinking, like, am I going to have that much energy in 10 years? Like, am I going to want to be doing this same exact thing in 10 years, So try not to limit yourself to, like, I only do this or I only do that. I don't know. It's always worked for me to, like, feel uncomfortable doing the same thing throughout. It's like there's something needs to change for me to feel like I'm not in the same spot. I don't know. Stay curious and keep learning and ask questions. And I mean, you can literally learn anything on the internet nowadays. You can become an amateur anything. You can become an amateur mixing it. And I think a good modern day producer knows how to do a little bit of everything. You know what I mean? Like I would never call myself a mixer, but I know enough about mixing that if somebody shits on my mix, on my production, I'll be like, okay, no, that wasn't the right person. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't know, just stay curious and try to learn as much as you can about everything.
I love that. That was great. Very inspirational, and I really appreciate you dropping so many gems this episode.
Okay. If you consider them gems, that's cool.
Yeah, gems and humor. The perfect, great combo. Best of the best.